Carole Sumner Krechman is the president of the Peacemaker Corps, which is an organization that focuses on helping youth get involved in their communities and is in partnership with United Nations. And thank you so much, Carole, for being here with me today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. This is exciting for me to meet new people and to expand our vision, which is that peace in the streets is something that all young people in the world can speak about. And maybe there'll be a change in how the world actually functions. This is the most difficult, I think, time that I remember in my lifetime.
It sure seems like the last few years have been brutal for everyone. Yeah, so tell us just a little bit about how you came to do what you do and what it is you do. And you mentioned peace in the streets, and I know you have something special about that to present too. So just share with us for a few minutes.
Well, I got involved with the United Nations in the last century, really. I started in 1995 for the 50th anniversary of the United Nations. And at that time, I was on a committee, what's called a non-governmental association. And I was made chairwoman of that particular group because there were some changes in leadership. And it was a very interesting time. It was the 50th anniversary of the United Nations, of the charter that was signed in San Francisco. The organization that I was running at that time was called the Friends of the United Nations. It was the very first non-governmental organization to actually be formed at the UN. And here we were, that was 50 years after the forming of the United Nations and the signing of the charter, which happened in San Francisco. So we, as an organization, were invited to create an event in San Francisco around the 50th anniversary. And I did with my organization. We had 3 Nobel Peace Prize winners, Mary Robinson of Ireland, Bishop Tutu, and Nelson Mandela, who had only recently been released from prison.
Right. Oh, wow.
And it was sort of an interesting story because I had just been made chairperson of the Friends of the UN, and they had very important people on that board. It was the first non-governmental organization to be formed at the UN. And so I was made chairperson, which was kind of a surprise at the board meeting. And I got back to New York to get started on the efforts that we were going to do for the 50th anniversary. And I got a call from Dag Hammarskjöld's nephew. Dag Hammarskjöld was the first Secretary General of the United Nations. And, and Knut calls me to congratulate me for being elected chair of the Friends of the UN. And then he said, I think we have a problem and it might cause an international, concern to everyone. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, it could be a really terrible thing that could happen. I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, well, the King and Queen of Sweden have paid for a piece of music that they want played at the UN 50th anniversary in San Francisco. And the gentleman who's running the whole thing hated it because it was dissident. And he didn't want to play the music. He says, and this would be terrible because the King and Queen of Sweden, Nobel Peace Prize, they paid for this. So I got on the phone. He says, you got to do something, Carole. And I said, I didn't even want to be chairman. Now you're telling me that there's an international thing that's happening. And he said, well, you've just got to do something about it. So I thought and thought and thought. And I called the guys in San Francisco, and he said, "Oh no, James hates it, and he doesn't like it. It's not music, it's noise." I said, "Well, we're going to be doing this event in the Great Hall of the Peoples, where we have 3 Nobel Peace Prize winners who are going to talk about what they've done and how important what they've done has been." I said, "Let me ask you, the Great Hall of the People is a very large building and a very large theater. What are you going to play in terms of music when people walk in and walk out after the event, to make it seem more, more important or even more comfortable?" And he said, "Well, I don't know. I hadn't thought about it." So I said, "Well, why don't you ask your boss if we could play that music that he hates while people are walking in to get seated, sit down at their specific place, and then afterwards we could play it again." So that worked. My diplomacy
Wow.
worked.
Yeah.
So afterwards, because we were the organizer of that event, we had a reception. And I walked over to the Mandela, who was the new prime minister of South Africa. And I said, "I'm really fascinated about how you were able to change in 3 years this apartheid into a different environment." He said, "Well, I brought the tormentor and the tormented together in a court setting so they could share their stories and learn that we're all humans." And the light bulb went off in my head. And when I came back to New York after that event, it was across the country. It was a very big event. I said to my team, I said, "I am going to leave this non-governmental organization and start my own, because I think storytelling is probably one of the most important things that human beings can do. And I want to form my own NGO, which would be about telling stories about their lives. And I want the children to be involved." And that was the beginning of the Peace in the Street Film Festival and the Peacemaker Corps, which we formed the following year. And then what we started doing was bringing young people into the shopping malls, because I had a business that was in shopping malls and I knew a lot of the mall owners. And most of the malls were built, had a place for the outside people to meet. They all had meeting rooms and greeting rooms and places. That was just part of the CC&Rs that you had to deal with when you built a mall in the late 90s into the early 2000s. And so we started bringing young people from both ends of the financial spectrum, from those who came from a higher level of living and those who lived in a lower, not necessarily near the mall. But so we brought these 2 groups of young people together for a 3-hour day on a Saturday, and then a Sunday. After what they've learned, there was a big event at Central Court, and the mall owners threw it and had food, and they won. Each one of them got a Peacemaker prize, a Peacemaker medal. And that was the beginning, way back at the beginning of 2000.
And you're still doing that Peace in the Streets Festival, aren't you?
Well, we morphed away, right. We morphed away from having the groups come to the mall when the malls started getting shot up and started in overseas. Obviously now everyone carries a gun, and you walk in a mall, you could get killed. But this wasn't, so I wanted to make a little move and change with our this whole thing that I put together, training kids to get along with one another. And it seemed to me that the best way to do it was to have them make a little video. And so that was started in 2016 was the first time that we did a film festival. And we had 8 films that were submitted, and now we get hundreds. And now we've got almost every country in the world has delivered videos to us. This is a hard year with the pandemic, with the war in Ukraine. We're getting so many messages from Moldova and Poland and Ukraine for the kids to make videos. It's hard to raise money in this environment, as much as we have history there at the UN. So in 2019, right before the pandemic hit, the UN invited, we had always given the award to the winners at the UN, but we did it in the delegates' dining room. And to me, it was a little stiff for the kids then, because we had young people from 8 years old to 16. And so I approached the United Nations in 2018, before the pandemic happened, and said, you know, what I'd really like to do is set up like a living room in the lobby of the United Nations, where there's a very large space that is never used. And it's by the kiosk and the entry. I said, if we set that up with the monitors that I saw you had at another event, you have about 20 of them on stands where they move them around. And I said, we could sort of create like a living room environment at the UN, and the winners would stand by these kiosks or these video thing, the delivery system, and talk to the people who walked through and see, they would stop for a minute, some would stay longer. It was a gigantic hit. It was like one of the most exciting, that was 2019. And the UN was so pleased with what we did. It was like, they had never really had this kind of event for kids right in the middle of the lobby. So we all know in 2020 what happened, that we had COVID. And so we were not able to have the kids come in 20 or 21. But this year, we are back in the lobby of the UN with our kids, and we have a wonderful addition, and our agenda is going to be amazing. We're going to show the films in the living room setting with the kids from 10 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon. And they'll go get some lunch, which will give them little coupons. They could go downstairs and pick out whatever they want, and then take it up back to where they started, where we've redone it into more like a movie theater where you have seats. But we're going to save a space for a fireside chat with the Rotarians around the world who are involved with peace. And we're going to have the adult Rotarians and the kids that have participated in winning. And we'll have an hour of their fireside chat where they'll be asking questions and the youth will be answering them, and we'll record it. And when that's over, then the last of it will be from like 3 to 5 in the afternoon. We'll be giving the awards away. The UN television is going to film it all, and it will be available for a whole year on the UN television channel.
Wonderful.
So here we are, many years, all these years later, with kids that have gotten hired by Disney or having their own school where they're teaching videos, or whether it's in Pakistan or India. We're in 46 countries, and we hope that this little chat you and I are having, Jennifer, when you speak to the rest of your team, that we encourage them. There are 3 different categories. There's 8 and under, 9 to 13, and 14 to 18.
Okay.
There they are. And we would love to have films. They're free to enter. You don't have to spend any, you just go to our website, which is www.psgff.com or org. That's Peace in the Street Global Film Festival. And send your video. And if you win, you're invited to the United Nations, and you'll have to, well, we have difficulty in getting visas sometimes and getting them here. So we are putting it back on in the country that they live in it, that they want. And hopefully we get some young people. We have an office in Mexico City now. We have an office in India. We have an office in Pakistan. We have an office in South Africa. We have an office in the other South Africa, Cape Town. We're pretty much, besides all over the United States, all over the world. And you can see the films on our website, and hopefully it's free. You can come to the United Nations and enjoy the afternoon with the children.
It's wonderful, Carole. And storytelling is very powerful for peace. I want to thank you for giving your time. And just as she just finished saying, you know, I encourage you to let young people know that they can still enter the festival, and otherwise be prepared to support financially and in watching and that sort of thing. Thank you so much for being with me here today, Carole.
It was wonderful. And then, yes, they have till the end of October. November 1st is the deadline.
So it's coming up. It's coming up.
Well,
all right. Welcome. I'm Jennifer Boyat. Welcome to a conversation with leading peacemakers. It is time for our leaders to be peacemakers and for peacemakers to be our leaders. I'm joined here today by 2 amazing human beings. I'd like you to welcome Shor Denny, who is the founder of Community Now. And she works with young people and anyone, but young people in that organization, helping them with mental health and social health, and making different kinds of choices, especially when we've had a lot of these challenges in the last few years. Welcome, Shor.
Thank you.
And then we have with us Scarlett Lewis, who is the founder of the Jesse Lewis Choose Love movement. And she also works with young people and anyone. Kind of along the same lines, but almost a little bit different, trying to make love popular and teaching skills for reconciliation and making those kind of choices. And welcome, Scarlett.
Thank you.
And so let's just go right into hearing about your stories. Shor, how did you make the decision to do what you're doing, or how did you come to what you're doing? And then as you end that story, tell us what you're doing these days.
Well, thank you, Jennifer, for just allowing us to be here. What a great environment and forum. And oh my gosh, I've looked at the Choose Love movement and I cannot wait to see how we can get involved together. It's just amazing. So Community Now, what I started this program because we work a lot with trauma, adverse childhood experiences, and coping. I got my degree as I went on this journey. So I was a accounting professional for many years. And one day I had a complete nervous breakdown. You know, it took time, but then it happened. So when it happened, I, was kind of lost. I left my husband, took my child, moved into an apartment, lost my job, and had to figure out who I was. I was very stigmatized. At first, I thought I was weak, and I had to go through this whole process of who am I, And why did this happen to me? Being an African American and just being a woman, I think we're always told to keep moving forward. No matter what happens, look forward. Oh, let it, dust. Don't let it, let it roll off your back. All of that. So I believe that I did that. But again, one day everything came and hit me, and that made me understand really what mental health and wellness was. So I went back to school and I got my degree in psychology because I refused to be sick, right? And I could not heal. The places I was going, the therapists, they were not helping because we were in a different place. I'll just say it that way. And what I needed was someone to help me understand what happened to me, not to like live through what I went through. So in school, what I understood was I started getting information on adverse childhood experiences, and you really should look it up. Nearly 70% of Americans have at least one adverse childhood experience, and that usually is divorce, would be a common one that we would all have dealt with at a young age, but there are many more, right? There are 9 more. I have 9 adverse childhood experiences from being a child. So there are direct correlations to health and wellness as you age, depending on the number of ACEs that you have as a child and how you deal with that, the coping, right? The resilience. So as I was in my journey and I started these community programs, I started a Safe Routes to School program while I was sick because I saw that there was a need for our youth in elementary school for families to get involved and for us to, help get our students to and from school safely. Also with the traffic, Safe Routes to School thinks of it as a traffic and transportation issue when you get up to the school sites and you see all of those families and the chaos that goes on in the morning. But what we found by working with the youth, we started a youth program there, and what we found was that it really wasn't 500, 700 cars coming to a spot at the same time. It was actually the behavior of the people in the cars and the behaviors that the children had when they came out of the car. So I think I have a few minutes. So I always said, okay, so you have Beth, right? And her mom said, Beth, tomorrow I need you to get up early because I have a meeting at work, right? And I don't have any time tomorrow. So Beth, of course, does not wake up on time. Mom is late. So what did I tell you, right? So now there's an aggressive morning happening, right? Beth is up, oh my God, she kind of freaked, her parent might be one of those that is fussing and cussing at her all the way to school. You notice that at school sites, there are parents that make a 2-lane into a 4-lane, kick their kids out in the middle of traffic and have them running through the cars, right? These are the situations that we saw. And I just couldn't believe that when they got to the school site, the principals at the school site said, you must be ready to learn. And what we saw was there was no transition. So the beginning of my programming was creating an atmosphere and environment for our youth to where they could transition from whatever chaos was in the morning into that learning mindset, right? And with that came kindness, coping. I continued to go to school and got my master in mental wellness with an emphasis in prevention. Because as I said earlier, intervention did not work. And intervention, we live in an intervention world. And what I found was that we must stop. So one of the main things that we do with our programming is we teach people how to cope, because I found that with adverse childhood experiences that over 70% of Americans have one, which means that we all have had to overcome a challenge at some point. We've all dealt with something. And if we can tap into that individually, then we can see each other. Before COVID, we were all lies, right? It was either we thought we were robots or God, because nothing was wrong. I had the perfect car, I had the perfect house. I couldn't tell you that anything was going on in my personal life, because then you thought I was failing or this or that. Well, after COVID, we saw that mental wellness is what is needed in the world. So my programming changed, and through COVID, we started developing how do we cope, how with the stressors that we have in our lives, are we expressing that, and how are we coping with it before we get to intervention, right? Before I flip out, so what are we doing? What steps are we taking? So before COVID, we thought that no one, that you're born with mental wellness, but then if you lose it, you can't get it back. You have to go to somebody and they give it back to you. What I have learned, and what I am trying to teach is that we maintain our own wellness, and that if we monitor ourselves daily, not daily, hourly, moment by moment, because each phone call can change your mental attitude, right? Each moment of life, some challenge could make you, so you need to monitor yourself and say, where am I? And then pull in resources and skills and tools to help you cope. So as I was doing my master and created another program, one actually I did with natural hair, because I'm African-American, I have curly hair. So how do we in America deal with our curly hair in a straight-haired society? There's a lot of mental wellness that goes into that. So, anyway, that's what I did. So that's an offshoot. But then what I really found was that when we came out of being locked up, everybody was aggressive. This was normal. If you know anything about psychology, I mean, you think of our prisoners and people that go into jails and they're in isolated places. When they come out, they're aggressive. They're overly sensitive, their emotions. So what I believe should have happened was CDC should have done a PSA across the nation saying, you are going to be aggressive, y'all. When you come out of the house, when somebody comes up to you, you're not used to being approached anymore. So, breathe, right? Let's start doing some coping strategies, some prevention. Before you leave your house, get prepared. Okay, there are going to be people around. There's going to be folks on a freeway. I might get blocked off, right? And instead of thinking of, oh my God, I'm overwhelmed, there's something, oh, look what they did to me, we could start saying, okay, I know I live in a stressful world, but how am I dealing with it? And what tools have been put in place for me to maintain my wellness? Because if I'm not well, our community is not well. And so that comes into individual trauma turning into community trauma, where we are all dealing with the same trauma, but in a different way, right? So the community, some are cussing each other out in a food line, right? They're in a grocery store trying to beat up somebody because they stepped too close to them. Or there's the road rage because someone had the audacity to try to get on the freeway, right? Right in front of you. So with the programming that we do, we are talking about now, we focus on emotional intelligence, because what we learned is that the 5 prongs of emotional intelligence are needed right now in our community, with the social justice and the cultural diversity that we have, and the equity that we're looking for within our communities. That if we start looking at self-awareness, number 1, who am I? How do I tick, and why do I think the way I think, right? Especially based on our history here in America. And then if you start looking at self-motivation, so now that I know myself, I can start understanding how to motivate myself, right? And how to maybe change some of the behaviors, my negative behaviors, into positive, because now I understand why I do it. Not just, oh, it's just me, right? So then you have empathy. So if we have empathy, then we can look at others who are different from us and try to step into their shoes so that we can have more compassion for what others are going through. And then there's social, there's self-regulation, which means that I bring tools into my own world so that I don't cuss people out, right? So that I learn how to manage my own self, so that I understand how I impact you when I'm talking to you, or how you're impacting me. And then, oh my gosh, I forgot. I'm not sure what number I'm on. Oh my goodness.
Oh, no worries.
Relationship skills, because you're speaking my language, Shor. I mean, everything that you're saying, I don't know if you see me, I'm like, yes, thumbs up. I love you, and we speak the same language. So I know those 5 core components. And they are self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, and emotional intelligence,
Yes,
managing
yes.
our emotions.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you. And I add to that cultural intelligence, because we're in a time now where we need to really plug into culture. And just lightly on this subject, because this is a part of my programming, we talk about culture, right? And what happened here in America, and how we now are impacted by it. Because some people believe that only one group of people or this group of people are impacted by the history of America, but we all are. We all inherited it. So we all live in it, and we all should understand what we are, where we live. So in cultural intelligence, what we're saying is, have you done a DNA test? Have you talked to your family and found out who you are? Because we are not Black, we are not white, those are classes. What is your ethnic background? So that we can start talking more person to person. We are all minorities here in America, because we all come from different places. So how do we tap into ourselves so that we can, again, understand our plight here? The person that used to be called O'Reilly changed their name to Riley for a reason, right? The people that in the past have assimilated into the dominant culture here in America, there are some that are not able to assimilate into those classes. So how do we understand our culture and our struggles, right? As I'm saying, the Irish group, they had challenges here, right? And they assimilated. The Italians, all of these different groups of nationalities. So what is your history, right? Not just I'm Caucasian, but what is your history? So that we can now start talking, because we have so much more in common than our class, right, of white and Black. So that is something else that we talk about, to try to see how we can tap into each other and have that empathy, have that self-awareness. And how can you have self-awareness if you don't even know where you come from? So those are some of the things. And segueing into what we're doing right now, we do different programming for youth in school systems at an elementary K through 12 at different levels, dealing with culture and understanding coping strategies, right? Talking about ACEs lightly in different environments with our youth, so that they can understand that perhaps if their families are not involved in their world, right? They are self-absorbed and they're not in my life, right? They're not involved in what the kid is doing. And then how do we impact that little one to know I have me, that I am strong, that even though my parents are doing all of this stuff and all of these things are going around me, that I can be in me, right? That I stand in me, and that I have value in my community. I have value to me, and that there are skills that I can be taught at a very young age to keep me coping and in a positive path, even though my family life may be going crazy. So we do different programming like that. Then we do it from the teacher viewpoint and say, okay, we know you've had trauma in your life, and we know that you are trying to cope. That maybe in some of these instances, we see the student triggering the teacher, or the teacher triggering the student. So how do we work with those dynamics in the school site so that we can have everyone understanding that empathy and building those social relationships, right, in an open way? And then we do it from the parent view, to where we work with parents on, this is your life, right? A lot of minority and non-minority groups have dealt with a lot of stuff in their youth, and those negative coping strategies have led them to where they are, right? So people with bad drinking habits, I started drinking at 7, I think. My parents had me pouring their drinks, and they said that when we poured their drinks, if we poured lighter ones, we could have drinks with them. So we had highballs and they had drinks, but we made them all. So we drank theirs and we drank ours as we made drinks. So I've been drinking most of my life. So if you put that into a negative coping skill, because that's how one of my copes would be drinking when I get stressed, then that goes into liver damage, right? That goes into not being real effective at work because I have an addiction. So when we talk about our ACEs, they do have direct correlations, and we try to bring that awareness with community. Now, last out in, kindness is the key. There is nothing in this world that we cannot do to impact each other in the most instant and positive way than to be kind. The oxytocin that it goes off in your system just in knowing that somebody did something kind is amazing, but yet be the one that did it or the one receiving it, really the one that did it. There are studies that show that you live longer, that you live healthier, that being kind is what we should be striving for, not only out in the world, but for ourselves. Because as I said, we've dealt with trauma, we've dealt with a lot of things, and we need to forgive ourselves. We need to love who we are and bring in that self-care and bring in those skills and know that we are worth it and valued within our community. And I hope I didn't go, I don't know.
Sure, you're a delight. I love this. Got some wonderful energy. I've actually got so many thoughts already. I'm not sure if I should say them now or kind of go about later, but I think what I'm hearing you say too is both to have the room to recognize that we're all in this really, we're all in this really hard spot and not have it be a secret or a taboo or to bring it up. And at the same time, to be able to make those choices, make those other choices, to the degree that we're able and want to. And I think I've thought about choice my whole life and felt like I didn't have choice. I mean, that's the thing we feel. We feel like we don't have choices, whether it's this arena or some other arena. And so when we find out that we have a choice and maybe someone's rooting for us to make that choice, that is so powerful, just to be able to make a different choice. And I think that the other thing, and again, maybe we want to rip on this later, we'll see where we go, but you were talking about hair, but pick a body part, right? I mean, with our society, and I won't just say women because men have to deal with it too. But if we're talking about personal peace, there's almost nothing that can violate personal peace than a body part. I was just thinking about that and the kind of illusions that we have in our society about that. But that's almost a different direction. We may or may not get into that. But anyway, well, I appreciate you sharing and what you're doing. Scarlett, love to hear from you, and kind of the same thing. Just share where you're coming from, what you're doing, where you're going.
Well, I have to say, Jennifer, you curated this conversation perfectly because just Shor, I love you already. I love everything that you said, although I came about almost the same thing, but in a much different way. My journey started when my 6-year-old son was murdered in his first grade classroom at Sandy Hook Elementary School, alongside 19 of his first grade classmates and 6 educators in one of the worst mass murders in US history. And, after that, I found a message that Jesse had left on our kitchen chalkboard. The first time I came home, it was nurturing, healing, love. He had written this sometime shortly before he died. The 3 words were phonetically spelled because he was in first grade and just learning to write. But it was so interesting to me because it gave me the solution to what happened in that moment. I knew that if Adam Lanza, who was a recent graduate of the Newtown school system, had attended Sandy Hook Elementary School, his mother had taught there, if he had been able to give and receive nurturing, healing love, the tragedy would never have happened. I've never met a person. Now, of course, I've never met Adam Lanza. He killed himself after he murdered all those people. But I've spoken to school shooters. I work in prisons as well as schools and with parents and every other group. I've never met anyone who has harmed themselves or someone else without being hurt and harmed themselves. As Shor said, ACEs are such an important part of how we can come to and be curious about someone else's history. Where did that come from? You know, even if you're in a situation and someone is not being kind, instead of being reactive and putting up our dukes like our brain wants us to do to keep us safe, really grounding ourselves, getting into the present moment and getting curious. I wonder why they're acting that way. And then coming back at them with compassion instead of just duplicating or even surmounting the aggression that we're being faced with. Well, and I'm getting ahead of myself because I knew that Jesse's message was where we needed to turn in order to survive and even thrive, in addition to being the solution. So I took a step back and I started looking at how we were handling school shootings. And well, of course, what we had done until that point wasn't working. So I had a lot of pressure to get involved in organizations that were already fundraising on day one after the Sandy Hook tragedy. And I thought, you know what? That didn't work for my son. I'm not going to do the same thing over and over and expect a different result. So I wanted to do something different. I wanted to really be part of the solution. So I watched how people were blaming Adam Lanza, the school shooter, and his mom, who gave him access to the gun. And I thought, wow, that's just way too easy, because if it was all their fault, it would never have happened before, and it would never happen again. That's just a cop-out for us to say, that's the solution, what's for dinner? We have to take responsibility for how we failed Adam, frankly, through the system and processes that he and his mom went through and tried to get help from and didn't. So this is a really hard thing to hear. And a lot of people don't want to hear it because there isn't just an easy solution, like even gun control. When you think about how we have focused on the problems and watched them grow. So gun control, all the billions of dollars we've raised have created more guns on our streets than ever before in the history of mankind, and a 30% increase in violence last year. I love Shor. You're doing the exact same thing that I was doing when I was listening to you. And I looked at bullying. How have we handled bullying in schools? Anti-bullying, a double negative. That's never going to make a positive. And of course, it's escalated. How have we handled substance abuse? Let's see, we have focused on the problem. Let's see, we did the war on drugs. I think that started in the 70s. And then all the billions of dollars that we've pumped into the system thus far have created I think there was a 30% increase in overdoses last year alone. In fact, every year that I've been speaking for the past 9.5 years since my son's murder, I've said every year I haven't had to update my slide, because I've said this, we have the highest number of overdoses ever before in the history of mankind. And it kept increasing. All these things that we're paying for as taxpayers, by the way, completely not working. We are following the diseases of despair as they escalate skyward. Even speaking about mental illness, and Shor, you hit upon this as well. What do? We look for the signs of mental illness. And I'm not saying that that's a bad idea. I think it's a very good idea. But what I'm saying is that we must address the root cause of the suffering that leads to all this, or we will never get ahead of these problems. I love Desmond Tutu's quote where he says, we have to stop just pulling people out of the river. We have to go upstream and find out why they're falling in the first place. And I'm filled with goosebumps. I live in goosebumps because this is just the truth. And it may not be the easiest truth, but it's what we have to do. We have to take a portion of the resources that we're putting towards these problems. And I'm talking about money, time, and effort, and we have to address the root cause. So I literally, I saw this message on the kitchen chalkboard, nurturing, healing, love. I'm watching what's going on, and it's just more of the same. And I can tell you 9.5 years later, we've had over 350 school shootings since Sandy Hook. And let me tell you something. If our children's health and well-being were a priority, if their safety was a priority, we would make it happen. We keep our money safe, right? And our children are a much more valuable and precious asset than our money. So we really need, there's nothing more important. That's why whenever I say to educators, I say, you all are our modern day superheroes. We're not only giving you our kids now and asking you to teach them reading, writing, and math, but we have to ask you to start teaching social and emotional competence. And so I think before, and there is still this thought process that, oh, well, that's a parent's responsibility. And when I say social emotional competence, I'll break it down even further than the 5 core components. These are what are called essential life skills. And by the way, not skills, tools, and awarenesses that we're born with. We have to learn them. So I'm talking about how to have relationships and meaningful connections, how to, as Shor said, manage your emotions, how to make responsible decisions. How about how to process pain and hurt in our lives and learn, because we know everybody needs love. We all want to love and be loved. Shor, you said, start focusing on what we have in common. We are 99.9% genetically the exact same. You want to love and be loved, so do I. You're going to feel pain, so am I. And so we know this. And so it is our responsibility to fortify our children with the ability to, and the courage to face difficulty in life. And then beyond that, how am I going to take the wisdom that I've learned from this experience and use it to help other people? But I'm telling you something, this doesn't come just by living your life and going through it. And I can tell you that I was 44 years old when Jesse was murdered. I saw the sign, nurturing, healing, love. I know that that is where we need to go. I meet with a doctoral professor because I'm a mom, I'm not an educator, but I know that I'm going to dedicate my life to getting this message out there. I know we're all the same in the want and need to love and be loved. And I know at the very base, what happened at Sandy Hook and what's happening in our communities is lack of connection and love. That's where it starts. And so I meet with a doctoral professor and I say, hey, how do I get this into schools? Because that's where I want to start, because we've got our kids there, they're little captive audience kids, their brains are forming. The neuroscience behind this is so powerful. He tells me it's character, social, emotional development. So I'm like, okay, I've never heard of that. I look at it and I'm astounded because I don't have these skills and tools. Now, my parents were fine. I mean, they were, I wasn't abused. Yes, my parents are divorced. And yes, we went through difficult times as a family, but all in all, pretty good parents. I went to college. I have a college degree. Not that that matters, but I didn't learn these essential life skills there. I've worked my entire life. I didn't learn them there. So I'm facing this horrific challenge without these skills and tools that would have helped me move through it. And then I realized, oh my gosh, if I had only known this, I would have been a better parent. I would have been a better person. I would have done so many things differently in my life. But then you have to let that go and you have to just be grateful. Wow, this is incredible. So I went back to the curriculum director at Sandy Hook Elementary School and I sat down with her. This was maybe 1 or 2 months after the tragedy. And I said, I'm just like, have you ever heard of this type of learning before? And she's like, yeah. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, well, the program that we had was so expensive that we couldn't train all the teachers. So we sent a small contingent out to get trained. They were supposed to come back and train the trainer. Never happened. The program never got out of the box. And this is something I will say here. The program that they purchased 9.5 years later is still in the box, in the basement where I store my Choose Love e-store stuff. So obviously that doesn't work. So I thought, okay, I need to create something that will get out of the box and that will not only help children, but it will help their educators. I'm coming from a space where I was blown away by these skills and tools. And I've learned them through helping create this free program. The program had to be free because it would have saved my son's life, and it can reduce and prevent. This program teaches the skills and tools you were talking about, Shor, that when you don't have them, you struggle, that can lead to almost all of the issues and suffering that we're seeing in our society. And this isn't my opinion. There are decades of research to back this up. I mean, I know I'm talking about love, but I also love the science and the neuroscience behind it. It's incredible. We know what to do. This isn't an issue that's unsolvable. We already know what to do. And so we just have to do it. And that is what I've been doing, is just going around and educating people on what this is and the importance for it. Actually, the fact that it's the #1 way to have a safe school. And even if you think about what we've been doing to keep our kids safe in schools, if you look at the pathway to violence that the Department of Homeland Security uses, it starts with a grievance. This grievance then escalates up into an attack. Now, the way that we think, Shor, you talked about this, we focus on the negative. 70 to 80% of all of our tens of thousands of thoughts are negative. Over 95% are repetitive. We're reactive. It's just, I mean, and this is reflected in everything that goes on in our life, including what we choose to research. Anyway, so we would focus on the attack end and hardening the schools, because that's how we look at all of the problems. And we've done that. And by the way, Sandy Hook Elementary School, they had all of the latest technology that you could ever want. In fact, they just had an active shooter drill 3 weeks before this tragedy. And still, you know, it happened. And we know now that hardening, unfortunately, is necessary, but that the most important part of school safety is a school's culture. Because if you have a school with a culture that's connected, that's loving, and the message of choosing love. Jennifer, you even touched upon what our personal power is as human beings, and that is our ability to choose in any situation, circumstance, or interaction, how we thoughtfully respond. And we can respond with love, or we can respond with fear and hatred. And you learn how to hate. Babies aren't born hating, they learn it. And so we can teach how to love. Love feels good. If you boil this all down, as human beings, we're just trying to feel good. Love feels good. Love, compassion, gratitude, forgiveness. That feels good. Anger, hatred, frustration, resentment, that feels bad. So we have a choice when we have some skills and tools to deal with that choice. And we focus on a very powerful formula that's neuroscientifically accurate. And it's right, whoops, here, I'm backwards, my background, and that is courage, having the courage, and courage, science says, is like a muscle. You can strengthen it and practice it. And we need courage to Jesse, my son, showed tremendous courage in his final moments. He stood up to the shooter and literally saved 9 of his classmates' lives before losing his own. By the way, our 6-year-old students in first grade should never have to be in that situation, and they don't have to be. But Jesse did an incredible thing for that act of bravery. He was given a commander-in-chief funeral, which is reserved for heads of state, returning war heroes. Jesse was considered a war hero because his first grade classroom was a literal war zone. I talk about that when I say courage. I always think about Jesse's courage, but actually I'm talking about, and by the way, we have the capacity for Jesse's courage if we practice it, but I'm talking about the courage that we show every single day from the moment we wake up, and how we choose to face the challenges in our day, how we choose to show unkindness with kindness, how we choose to do the right thing, how we choose to tell the truth. There's so many choices that we make all day long, how we choose to treat each other, what we choose to think about. I mean, it's constant, and we need to be grounded, we need to be focused, and we need to have courage to make the right choices. And then it goes into gratitude. We have to have the courage to be grateful when things aren't going our way. And that literally neuroscientifically strengthens us to be able to face challenges. And then we go into forgiveness. And it was really funny when people heard that I wanted to put forgiveness into the formula, because everybody was like, ooh, wait, you want to teach kids forgiveness? Ooh, that's way too lofty a character value to do that. They'll never get it. Well, here's the really cool thing. Forgiveness is kids' favorite character value. And do you know why? Because of all ages. Because they say forgiveness is like a superpower. It feels so good to let it go, because they know, because we teach them, and something that most adults don't know, I didn't know, that forgiveness is a gift that you give yourself. It's not a gift that you give somebody else who doesn't deserve it and that hurts you. It's a gift that you give yourself. And there's decades of research behind the benefits of forgiveness for the forgiver. And I've gotten a lot of attention for forgiving Adam Lanza, the shooter. But when you look at and you understand the science behind forgiveness, I say that our new and improved definition is taking your personal power back. Like there'd be no reason why I wouldn't do that. Otherwise, I would be giving control to the person who murdered my son over my thoughts that impact how I feel, that then impacts my behavior and how I show up in my relationships. I don't want to be another victim of Adam Lanza. So forgiveness is like a big set of scissors, and I cut that cord that attached me to pain. And I took my personal power back. It's so important to understand that forgiveness is the key to healthy relationships. Healthy relationships, per Harvard University, are the key to happiness. And so, I mean, it's really, really important. And then, and of course, it takes courage to forgive someone who has hurt you, who doesn't care, doesn't know, maybe is still hurting you. And it doesn't mean that, I mean, any feeling that you have, any anger is so justified. Whatever we feel is just information for us. There's no right or wrong. But there is a process that you go through forgiveness. And sometimes you do need to go through anger first. And sometimes I slip back into anger. And it doesn't mean that I have failed. It just means that I have to take a deep breath, take a step back, and choose to forgive again, because forgiveness starts with a choice and then it becomes a process. And it takes a lot of courage to do that. And also, it doesn't mean that you don't hold the person who hurt you accountable. It's a really important thing to understand. And then there's compassion in action. That's the fourth character value. Compassion is the identification of a need in yourself or someone else, and then an action to help ease that need within yourself or someone else. All the anxiety that we're feeling today, I say that COVID is a pandemic, but if COVID is a pandemic, then anxiety is a super, 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 super pandemic, because I don't think that there's a word that's higher than a pandemic. We know the opposite of anxiety, and we've known this for the ages. And it's now also, obvious in the latest neuroscience, is positive action. And so there are a lot of things that you can do to overcome anxiety. You want to be able to choose love and not fear. And this formula is a direct path to return that locus of control, which you guys were also talking about, the location of your personal control, feeling like you have agency, feeling like you make things happen instead of things happening to you. When you're not feeling like you have any control in your life, then you feel helpless, you feel like a victim, which is the definition of helplessness. You feel hopeless. And when you feel hopeless, that's when a lot of bad things happen. You can hurt yourself, you can hurt other people, but this formula is literally designed to return that locus of control back inside you, where you make things happen, where you can be part of the solution, where you can choose love. So I have been just speaking. This is my message. I speak everywhere I speak. We have launched this program. It's a comprehensive lifespan program. It starts prenatally. We have an infant toddler for nurseries, daycares, new moms. We have pre-K through 12th grade. We have a home program, a community program, and a work program, because we're all in this together. And I think more than ever, we have to understand that, and we have to take personal responsibility for what is going on in our world and take that positive action. Sometimes it feels like, oh, this is so big, there's nothing I can do. But actually, it is going to require that we all do something in order to create the world that we want to live in. We're all out of our comfort zone right now, which is a fantastic place to be, because that's when we're in our growth zone. So literally right now, we can create the lives that we want, the classrooms, the schools, the homes, the communities. We can create this right now, and it's up to us. And so that's been my message. All of our programming can be accessed on our website. You just register and you have access to everything. We're in over 10,000 schools in every state and 120 countries, by word of mouth and referral only. We have not been even able to outreach because the want and need for this is so great. And it's like sometimes I pinch myself, like, am I really spreading a message of love? This is incredible. Of course, it's never out of my mind why I'm doing this. I wouldn't be doing this, except that my 6-year-old son was murdered in his first grade classroom in Sandy Hook Elementary School. It's just still, to me, to this day, I can't believe that something like this could happen, especially in our country, but anywhere, and that it still happens. Uvalde happened. That was a carbon copy of Sandy Hook almost 9.5 years later. That shows, by the way, that there is no plan from the top, that we have to take responsibility for this, and we have to be part of the solution.
Thank you. Like, amen, right? Let's go home. Church over. No. Wow.
That was deep.
I did want to clarify, just for any listeners who aren't used to it's okay, sure, we can kind of be a little informal here, but I did want to clarify that when they say ACE, that's the adverse childhood experience. So if people aren't familiar with that. And just some thoughts that I had as you were speaking. I mean, I've always thought that love was both the hardest and the easiest thing. And sometimes, and in fact, I kind of think about the being a transition when you decide to be that kind of person. Well, we don't all decide to not be that, but sometimes there has to be a little bit of purpose in it. Otherwise we get caught up in all the aggression that is in our society, just what we're used to seeing on TV and our families and whatever. But there's like I think there's a little bit of a difficult transition, like just to begin, like, am I going to be that person? What am I going to have to, who is that? What am I going to have to give up? You know, am I going to be safe doing that? And, but what my point is I can tell you, once you get to the other side, it's fun. It's fun and easy to forgive and love. It takes less energy, you know? And,
yeah, and you're safer, and you're part of creating a safer world than you are when you are fearful and anxious and angry.
right. And Carole, who I recorded earlier, she kind of brought up something. I guess she'd had a connection with Nelson Mandela at one point. And I don't know if she heard him say this personally or she had just, but I guess he said something about bring the tormentor and the tormented together. And what is the hardest thing and the most necessary thing about peace and related work and related states is that we have to get to that point. It's hard, but it's necessary, because, and even like Martin Luther King Jr., when he was doing bus boycotts and getting human beings out of the back of the bus, he made sure and said, we're not putting other people in the back. That's not the point. We're not going to switch and put other people in the back. We're going to need to all be just on the bus, you know, reconcile. And that,
so beautiful.
That's the courage. That's the courage. And when Shor was talking about being kind, the kindest thing can sometimes be just give someone the benefit of the doubt. Not that we don't hold people accountable, like we have our boundaries and our limits, like this isn't going to happen, we're not going to do this. But to, you know, like the morning when we're at the car drop off, like, okay, maybe she's having a bad day, I'm not going to like take this into me, you know, the kindness of giving someone, there's a reason that they're that way, and that sort of thing. Anyway, so those are some of the thoughts that I had, but Shor, have you got any other thoughts as you've been listening to Scarlett?
Well, first I want to just say, oh my God, Scarlett, Mama, just as a woman, oh my God. I have tears. It's just overwhelming, just the aspect of how you got here. With that, oh my God, that you got here, right? Even out of that, so many people would have been just victimized and torn apart, me being one of them probably. And for you to have the courage and the gratitude and forgiveness and compassion to move forward with the programming that you have is amazing. The one thing that we really are very, very similar in our ideals and who we're approaching as well. Seeing that one of the things that I'm really excited about your success. We're not having, you know, as much. We have a challenge of still trying to get people to understand the nurturing, healing love. You know, social emotional learning is a thing that's already, you know, that's in some of the schools, not done well, as you stated. You know, there are a lot of these trainer things, and, you know, we try to work with that. But then we see another challenge that you said, which is funding. School district funding of programming that takes more. The fact that you're able to do it for free to a school district is phenomenal. The funding that you have to be able to do that. And I'd love to see what you can do over here on the West Coast as far as that. My bringing all that to say that still it's unfortunate that we are still in an intervention world. Just as Scarlett, as you were saying, all of the things that needed to be done and all of the programming that they had already put in place.
Yeah.
And it still happened because, as you stated, we are not dealing with the cause. And if we could start going into communities and talking to them real and talking about the pain and not helping people be ashamed of where they are. A lot of this is generational. I wasn't born and decided that this is what I wanted to do with my life. Things happened to me, right? And
Yeah,
I cope
absolutely.
and move and created what I am based on things that happened to me. So how can we, and this year, my goal has been, there are a few skills that just if humanity knew, that I think would help all of our communities across the world, not just our nation. And there's some self-care evaluation tools that we could do simply, throughout the day to maintain our individual wellness. But wellness is not something that is really being sought in our community. Although we say it, I hear them saying, self-care, I hear words, but when you look where the funding is, it's not in wellness, right? It's still really
Reactive, as you
intervention.
say. It
It's
is.
still an
It's
intervention.
reactive, and it's focused on the problems. And it's basically funding them getting worse. And that's what we're seeing right in
Exactly.
front of us. Yeah, we need to change the focus of the resources. And because of the enormity of the event that happened at Sandy Hook, and of course it was publicized through the
Right.
media for quite a while afterwards, and then I'm asked to speak after major events
Right.
like that, and we kind of stay in the media a little bit. We are funded by individual donations for the most part.
Mhm.
We don't get federal funding, as you said, Shor. These are, $10, $20, $30 donations that people send in from literally all over the world. And that's how we are able right now to keep our funding free.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's a beautiful thing, because that's
and-
the goal. The
Right.
goal is to have all of humanity, all of us, to learn the coping skills that we need at an early age. And for us right now, we've got to all catch up. But if we could at
Right.
least ensure that our elementaryers, middle schoolers are getting the skills, learning, because as you said, we get taught how to cope. My parents
Right.
taught me well. I
That's
learned how to smoke. I learned how to drink. I learned how to cuss. I learned how to fight. I learned how to cope.
Yeah.
The problem is my coping strategies don't work. They don't help me in society. They are not, they're not society positive. So how do we teach our youth and our families that there are positive ways to cope, as you said, with the challenges, and that it's okay to feel the pain? And how do we get through the pain? And another thing that we see in some of this, and in all of our youth, is a fear of striving, right? Because they're afraid to fail. There's such a thing of, achievement, and there's so much put for that achievement that you only achieve if you fail. And we're not putting that out in the news release that, so-and-so did this, but they worked on it every day for 2, 3, 10, 15, 12 years, right? To be able to do this. No one's talking about the work that's put in. Everything seems to supposedly be instant. So with programming like yours and ours, hopefully we can spread this message across, again, just limited to our nation, but across the world, to where we stop seeing so many people doing road rage, or we start seeing people having a different conversation. Right now, I go to health fairs and different events of my team and we just hand out informational items, or I just hand out compliments. You're something that says like, you're the best part of a team, or your ideals are always amazing, or, a substantive compliment, because no one gets compliments anymore. I went through an event
love
2
it.
weeks ago, and every vendor I gave a compliment. You just should have seen their faces. And then the animation, and then the goodwill, and then they were able to share the
It's a ripple effect, right?
so amazing. Right?
I did a women's expo once, and I did free hug sign, and you can't believe how many people stopped by. That
Right.
was the funnest part.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So as you said, that's what we're looking for, that love, that connection. And we go foul when we don't have it. And the statistics used to say, the Secret Service had some statistics out, I'm sorry, they're in one of my old presentations. And they said that the shooter was going to be a student with bad grades, a loner, usually a minority that was abused. That what we see consistently is that the shooters have pretty decent grades. They're not usually the loners. They are more the popular kids, or they're not really coming from broken homes. They're not. So the media and society is keeping the general populace thinking one thing, when the reality is that anyone can be the shooter, right? It's based on the causes in their life. Someone that's rich with both them, had never had any bad things happen to them at all, are shooters sometimes. And we need to look at that, because as Sheriff
Or it
Scarlett
doesn't
said,
look like they've had bad things, but there's some things
Right.
obviously they're processing.
Exactly. So what Scarlett said, what are the root causes? You can't stop bringing guns. Guns didn't do anything. It's the person that picked up the gun. Why are they picking up the gun? How do we work with these people, a grown and youth, so that we have them thinking about it, not just us as professionals, society thinking about, why would I pick up that gun, right? I mean, thinking of it in a different way, more of coping. How do I cope? I have all of this going on. Where are our resources at our schools to give our parents so that they have the ability? Where in the classrooms are they putting up big old signs that say breathe for our students? So our students, when they walked in, they're all freaked out, right? They just almost got in a fight on the campus, and
Yeah.
that they can come into the
So
classroom and go,
true. All of this.
oh my God,
Yeah.
okay, breathe. Where are the teachers that understand that they need to bring mindfulness into their classroom and bring the youth into them before they can start the chatter of the class and start the programming? Where is it that we find out that mental wellness actually means that you might need a day off? That it's not just when you have a holiday, that mental health days should be something that we have monthly, because along the month, just different things happen. And if we can stay in balance, if we can try to strive for that, then we will be well. Our community will be well. We will all be safe. There will be love, kindness, empathy in our world. But if we choose not to, as a community, to put the information into the community, because to me, the problem right now is, I only say it as the government, because they have the power to put information everywhere in our community, and they're not telling us. They're allowing us to go out there and cuss each other out and do road rage, and when the answer is very clear and easy. Little PSA saying breathe. We know this is a challenge, but hey, think of
Wouldn't
these
that be
social
great?
strategies, right? This is some fundamental things that
But that's not their focus.
Yeah.
You're right. That's not their focus.
And you know what, Shor, what I was thinking too, when you were talking about trying to get people to understand, we've actually kind of had a hit to all that too with the last couple of years. We're kind of back to survival mode, a lot of us, and mental health, mental wellness, not just health, but anyway, you know what I mean, the feeling that we're okay is a luxury to a lot of people. I mean, if they're trying to keep their housing, I mean, there's no room for, I mean, there ought to be. We need to be able to have those skills, but a lot of times that's not the first thing we think about is, I've just got to pay rent. It's not like, am I going to do some self-care or something, so it's almost nothing. And then I was thinking about the word unlearning. We talk about learning the skills to do these things, but I think everybody knows what it feels like when someone acknowledges you, or when someone forgives you, when someone gives you a compliment. we all can be reminded of those feelings, or but it's all the other stuff maybe on top to unlearn, what we learned in our life. I don't know.
When you say unlearning, it makes me think about our brains,
Mm.
because where do we learn things? We learn in our brain. That's where our memory is stored. And I think about how through neuroplasticity, we know that every thought we have impacts us on a cellular level. So every thought is leading towards languishing or flourishing. And so, you talk about unlearning, and I think of it as rewiring the brain.
Mm.
And so as you're adding these essential life skills that Shor and I are talking about, you're literally changing your brain.
That makes
And
sense.
your thoughts that you have in a more positive direction, or more proactive direction, the stronger the neural pathways become. And so that is the unlearning, in learning something new and a better way and a stronger way, something, a way that you can model for your own children. I mean, a part of my thoughtful response, here's the thing, you can't always choose what happens to you. And Shor, you were saying that, and that's kind of one of the basis of the Choose Love movement. However, you can take your personal power back in how you thoughtfully respond. And one of the things that I was thinking about, actually, before Jesse, we all waited at the firehouse that day, and we waited for hours. They were identifying the bodies, but they were telling us that they were looking for the kids, that they were hiding. And so I was thinking, though, it gave me time to contemplate what was happening. And then the longer, obviously, the time went on, the grimmer it looked. During that time, Jesse's older brother, had been in lockdown in Spanish class in 7th grade. And he actually came to the firehouse to wait with me. So I have my 12-year-old son there. Unfortunately, I mean, if I could do it over, I wouldn't have brought him into the worst day of our lives. But he was there. And, it's chaos, helicopters flying overhead, military men, and just absolute chaos. But, as I was being asked questions, really tough questions, what was Jesse wearing, identifying marks on the body, that type of question, I realized that my 12-year-old son was watching every move that I made. And we know the majority of our communication is not verbal, but he was listening to me. He was watching my facial expression. His eyes were glued to me. And I realized in the moment, because I practice being present, I'm modeling for him right now. I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I'm modeling for him how to move through this for the rest of his life, for how to move through difficulty, roadblocks, challenges right here, right now. And it helped me rise to the occasion, because I knew that. And so that's a message I want to send out to everybody who's listening. We're modeling right now, especially educators, but parents too, all of us, every moment we're modeling for other people that are watching how we respond. And we all have a choice in our response. You can learn skills and tools to help better facilitate that choice, but we all have a choice. It reminds me, this summer, I was my mom has a little lake house, and every year there are a couple that come and they fight, and they have this little kid, and it's so hard for me to hear that, because I can't stand for kids to be mistreated, especially after 12-14, my own tragedy. They fight in front of their little kid inevitably screams and cries. And so I'm sitting on the end of the dock, and they don't see me, and I'm listening to this. I'm kind of looking over. Finally, they see me, and you know what they did? They lowered their voice and they stopped fighting. And I thought, see, even people without the skills and tools, they have a choice. They knew what they were doing was wrong, and that they weren't being good role models. And when they saw somebody else was watching, they lowered their voice. And so I just think, sometimes it's just remembering and an awareness, as you started out with, Shor, that self-awareness piece is so important. We are much more powerful than we ever realize. Each one of us as individuals, we can't sit and be armchair warriors and say, and start blaming other people for what's going on in our lives. It doesn't work, and it's getting worse. And on our social media, who cares what people think? Get up and do something positive. Be a positive role model. What we say is choose love rather than fear and hatred. And we can all do this, and we can create better communities. We're coming out of a tough time. It was social, what was it? Social disconnection is what is the word? Social, what's the word? What's the whole mantra that out of? You know what I'm talking
Disconnection. I mean, we were all
social
home.
distancing.
Oh,
Social
distancing. Oh,
right?
yeah.
So people actually did that, but we are social creatures. We need one another in order to survive and thrive. Charles Darwin, the famous evolutionist, if I say survival of the, we all say fittest. Well, he never concluded that in his research. He concluded it would be survival of the most, he said sympathetic. And by sympathetic, he meant altruistic, generous, and compassionate. Really, it's survival of the most compassionate. And doesn't that make more sense? Instead of elbowing each other out of the way,
Wow, we got that one wrong, didn't we?
As a community, by loving and supporting one another, by helping one another. And we are going to have to step up to the plate and do that if we want to survive and thrive. And we want that for our children. There's no easy fix. And it's not pointing the finger at somebody else. It is getting up and looking at somebody else in the eyes. It's having that connection. It's getting our courage. Social distancing was the absolute worst messaging. You talked about the government and their messages, and why don't they just have billboards with breathe? Well, they had billboards with social distancing, and I realized I am talking in hindsight, but what the board should have said is physically distanced, but socially connected.
I see
And
what you mean.
know better. We know better. Social isolation is the worst thing that you can do for a human being. It is the worst punishment that we can have. And so that's what we were dictated to do, and people actually did it. And now we're seeing the repercussions of that.
Right.
And
That got into our brains.
The tip of the iceberg right now. It's going to continue, and it's going to get worse. So we're going to need to get this messaging out there even more. And the fact that, hey, everybody, you got a lot of power. You need to stand up and use it, but in a loving, kind, compassionate way.
And I think think that I have a lot of hope though too, because I mean, there's warrior queens like you, and we need to learn from you guys, and that's amazing. And when I think you started talking, when you were talking about the brain, I think you're right. I mean, we have to get who we are comes out of our body and comes into our body. Like the practicing we do is literally in our nervous system and that sort of thing. We kind of forget that piece sometime.
Garbage in, garbage out.
That's true. That's an old meme from our parents, and that works.
Well, this is a social distancing thing as well. It's called a cell phone. It has the same effect on our brain as drugs, and we're almost all addicted, and it's a big problem. It gives us front row tickets to the worst of humanity. And you might say, oh, well, it gives us front row tickets to the best of humanity as well. But guess what? We're wired with a negative bias. Our brains want to keep us safe. So what are we going to look at? We're going to look at the
The
worst of
negative.
humanity.
Mhm.
And our brains haven't yet caught up to having access to
Oh,
24/7
no kidding.
information. And so we really, really have to take notice, and we have to start educating ourselves and our kids how to move forward in this brand new world that our brains really aren't designed for. And hence, even more anxiety on top of that. It's not, what I'm talking about isn't simple. It's just really getting back to the basics. And as Shor's saying the same exact thing, the root cause.
Right.
And by the way, that is a direct pathway to flourishing. And that's what
Wonderful.
we all want in our lives. I want it for my own life. I want it for my kids. I want it for all of our children. I want it for our schools and our homes and our communities. And there is a direct path to it. We know it. Everybody listening, educate yourselves on it and spread the word. We're all in this together.
Awesome. We've had a beautiful conversation. I think we'll actually head to closing. So if there is any, well, not if, I'm going to ask you to, I know that you both have some beautiful messages. So just give some final words to those who will be listening. If you have any advice for them, or just anything that comes to your heart, I guess, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 minutes. Go ahead, Scarlett.
Well, I would just say, when I was parenting my 2 boys, and I was a single mom, and struggling every month. And I was thinking in my mind, I thought, okay, the school, they do their thing and they know education. I don't know anything about it. And I literally felt like I dropped my kid off in the morning and then I pick them up in the evening. Like, I'm responsible for them until I drop them off. And then I pick them up and then they're my responsibility. And what do? I love them. I have fun with them. I feed them. I clothe them. That's my responsibility, and the school has theirs. And what I didn't realize is that I was responsible for Jesse's safety, even when I dropped him off at the school, because as Jesse's dad says, I dropped him off with a book bag, and then we picked him up in a body bag. And the response was,
Yeah.
it wasn't even, I'm sorry, because that would denote responsibility. And so no one was held accountable. No one was responsible. It was just kind of like, whoops. And then it keeps happening. And I only say that because I think that, not to increase anxiety or anything. I'm saying it because it's our responsibility for all of our children's safety. And so I think, rather than think, oh my God, that's such an overwhelming concept, we go back to what's the opposite of anxiety? It's positive action. And there are things that we can do. And let me tell you something. You take one positive step in the direction of responsibility for what's going on in your kid's life and your community, it feels so good. You're gonna feel that anxiety go off you. And that first step might be contacting your school and saying, hey, do you have a character, social, emotional development program? And the answer should be, absolutely. Let me tell you all about it. And there's a parent component, and we welcome you. And we're practicing it every day. It shouldn't be. Don't worry about that. We've got it covered. That's not your responsibility. We do, but we're not allowed to talk about it. That type of thing. No, there should be full transparency, and everybody should be welcoming parents' input and help, and because we're all in this together. So, I mean, even if that's the first step that you take, and then don't take don't worry about that. No, say, no, I really want to know, because if you don't, then I just heard 2 women with incredible programs, and I want to send you the link. And I don't get
Exactly.
all up, right? Seriously.
Exactly. Thank you, Scarlett, for being here with us and giving of your spirit.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Shor, what is your wisdom for us?
I want to say that breathing is the most important thing that we can do right now. I'm going to suggest that you breathe when you wake up. You breathe before you leave your house. You breathe before you make a phone call. You breathe in between your meetings. You breathe, you breathe, you breathe. I ask that if you're driving, that you be kind and that you let someone on the freeway, that you think of someone else other than yourself and bring kindness into your life. I ask that you think of someone else and maybe say good morning or do something for someone. Open a door. Do something kind for someone else on a daily basis. And I just ask you to spread love and kindness, not to take on the anger and the negativity that we all feel around us almost constantly, but to start building your own positive energy and to share that, because as soon as you do, it pays forward and it usually comes back. So I ask us all in the name of peace and of love to pay it forward, to do something kind for someone else and see how it blesses you.
Thank you, Shor. You have a wonderful light. You both do. Well, I have been fed here this afternoon or this morning. And again, just thank you for your time and your messages. And I know that our audience listening is going to be uplifted and have some food for thought and be able to act. And thank you.
Thank you so much.
So amazing.
So great to meet you. Great to meet you,
Yes.
Shor. Oh, I love you.
Thank
So
you.
love from Connecticut.